Before we get started, just a quick note about something you hear at the end of the show. In the credits, I mentioned that Nate Schweber does the music. And don't worry, he still does, but I wanted to tell you that he's got a new album out. It's called Gaps, and it's available for download or in handy CD format, and I invite you to check out nateschweber.bandcamp.com to listen to snippets and to add it to your musical collection. Thanks for supporting independent musicians. And now, here's that familiar Nate tune to get us started. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this is a strange time in our country. But there's one thing we can all agree upon. Rauch beers are awesome. So if you're on Facebook, make sure you check out the This Week in Rauch Beer page. There, you can join other smoked beer enthusiasts discussing their latest finds and talking about all things descended from Bamberg. All right, this week on the show, we're not talking about Rauch beer, but rather cool ship ales, tart saisons, and more with Jason Pellett of Orpheus Brewing in Atlanta. It's the fun, familiar story of a home brewer who wanted to go pro and did. Pellett has a background in music, but fell in love with beer making and wanted to bring something special to Atlanta when he and partners opened up Orpheus Brewing 7 years ago. He's seen the brewery evolve over time, and while he has come to embrace some traditions and holds some things sacred, he's not afraid to mix things up as both a brewer and CEO. This means pushing the envelope of flavor, but also making sure that the bones of the business are solid. Orpheus has launched a leadership diversity program that is underway to help bring the beer industry along with the times and to make sure that the brewery is doing its part. Jason spoke to me via cell phone from the brewery, and we recorded this conversation on Election Day, meaning it's being released as you're hearing it now, just hours after the polls closed. This is not a political show, but so much of what's been happening in the country has seeped into everyday life and business. If you've been watching the news, you'll have heard that Georgia is considered a toss-up on the presidential level and could also have a flip in the Senate race. There's an evolution happening in the state, and I took that theme to start off with Jason on how Atlanta and the South, which was not super quick in adopting the craft beer industry, has changed since his own brewery opened. Here's our conversation.
Well, I mean, I remember when I was trying to raise money. We started really trying to raise money in 2012 or so. We opened 2014. So in mid 2012 through mid to late 2013 was when I was really going at that. And I know we'd be going to the Porter Beer Bar, which is one of the greatest beer bars in the country. And we'd sit down with potential investors and would go through the beer list and point out there's nothing from Georgia on this list. This is a list of some of the greatest beers available in the country, and it's in Atlanta, and there's nothing here from Atlanta, from Georgia at all.
Yeah.
And so that was really, that was at the time, one of the things that first was actually why I wanted to brew. There's just got a lot of possibilities out there that just weren't available here, and just more than just not available here. Just I thought there was kind of worlds of possibilities in beer that I wasn't seeing at all. But a lot of it was just not available around us. And so I thought there was lots of opportunity there for a different approach to beer. And so that would be a much harder sell right now because, the scene in Georgia has really matured in the last few years. All the way from, really great, like lager focused breweries. There's good barrel system all over. There's just actually, I think when I travel to other states, there's a lot of times more breweries, but I actually feel like across the board quality here is extraordinarily high.
Do you
And
think?
some of that may have been the impediments to entry
Mm-hmm.
before the law changed in 2017, where you basically had to be a packaging distribution brewery. There was no or a brew pub. There was no just full tap room. So
Right.
kind of had to have your stuff a little bit more together to open.
Right, because you were going into a much more competitive space through grocery chains, through through the full 3-tiered system, not just out the back door of a small couple barrel tap room.
Right.
So, what I'm fascinated about with your brewery is the scope of things that you're doing. I got to know your brewery through a lot of your cool ship beers and a lot of your method traditionale, however we're pronouncing it this particular week, beers. But you're also doing a lot of crazy IPAs, and you're not afraid of lactose, and you're doing some cool things with barrel aging. And to me, it's like when I've met brewers that fall into, I don't know, the love affair of lambic and goose and the Belgian tradition. Some of the other styles don't necessarily mesh with that, and so I'm curious. From, I guess this is your brewmaster hat on, not necessarily your CEO hat, but what do you want the brewery to be?
That's a good question. In some ways, I don't always know the answer to that question, and there are a lot of times I look at a brewery as easier to understand, taking parts of it at a time, almost like a brewery within a brewery.
It's interesting.
So there was, the big love that I had coming in was for barrel aged beers broadly.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted the goal from the beginning was to do, lambic style, lambic process, cool shit beer, but also big barrel aged stout. And so that side of the brewery was for a long time just turning stuff going into barrels. I called our barrel room for the first few years, and I was given tours the law change room, because it didn't really make sense to have any of that stuff going on with the way the laws work. So that was just kind of the I guess the passion side of it,
Yeah.
and the hope that one day things would change, but couldn't really justify the brewery existing to do those beers in Georgia. It was just model that worked for that. So so obviously that's changed now, unfortunately. But so that was always off to the side, and then so I got obsessed with sour beers in 12 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Actually, kind of what eventually led me to start wanting to brew. And I really wanted there to be affordable sour beer, which kind of weird looking around now. That's all over the place. But back then, I was a trumpet player. Trying to buy beer on a freelance trumpet player's money, and Pantheon was getting dusty on the shelf. Which, looking back now, I wish I had bought more. But
Yeah,
I
you
couldn't
and me both.
justify
Yeah.
$18 bottle. So it was like cheap sour beer back then was like a $5 bottle of Petrus, and I really wanted to bring sour beer to the market in a way that people could experience it, could actually afford it, drink 6-packs of it. So yeah, just actually as of a couple of days ago, 6 years ago was when we started canning Atalanta, our flagship Heartland based on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was the first packaged sour beer made in Georgia, and that was a whole lot of people in Georgia's first sour beer, and it was beginning of a few years of real struggle teaching people what sour beer was, bringing beer buyers at bars and stores to the brewery to share, and then getting really excited about it, and then taking the beer back to their place, putting it on the menu or whatever, and not really being able to explain it very well. People ordering it, not knowing what they were getting into, sending it back, and that was a few years of struggle there. But that was, I mean, so that's what I was really, one of the big goals that I had for the brewery and why I might want to actually open a place was to be able to bring sour beer to the mass to a certain extent.
It does strike me that even today, in an IPA heavy world of of craft, which doesn't have a huge overall grasp of the marketplace, or stronghold in the marketplace, that a tart plum saison could be a brewery's flagship.
I mean, I've held on to calling it a flagship, even though it sells at this point half as much, if that, of our newer kind of dual flagship double IPA. But I mean,
that's the CEO hat on.
I designed the brewery around making Atalanta year round. So we don't use our brew house exactly the way we used to. Now we generally sour the wort in a fermenter, but I kind of designed the brew house around being able to sour it in the mash, and then be able to actually separately have a dual mash lauter vessel, so it could bypass the mash if I had wort sour and stuff like that. So
okay,
kind of, I think, overthought that sort of logistical side of things at that point, but I didn't really have a model of how to approach doing a beer that sours everything like that. So, and we do it differently than basically everybody else does now. I mean, we use originally spontaneous, now repitched for over 6-year culture for our sour wort.
How did that evolution happen?
We actually started off early on. We didn't scale up very well, but we were actually, for the first few months, letting the mash itself sour, and we would just, control environment. At this point, I don't actually worry so much about blanketing with CO2, but we would blanket the mash with CO2, make sure temperature was we did this at around 122 degrees, 124 degrees, and just let the mash itself spontaneously sour, which would sometimes take 4 or 5 days, and then the lauter would just be a disaster, sometimes take 8 to 10 hours. So, I mean, the flavor was great. I mean, I really liked the character we got, but yeah, it was just way too hard on the brew house, just scheduling and everything. So we started lautering the wort before souring. So that made the lauter better. Still had to wait days for the souring to happen,
right.
And then we just started repitching a little bit of the wort batch to batch. So we have a few mother kegs that just hang out around the brewery, on the brew house, around the tank that we do souring in. And so we just been, repitching that mother ever since.
You talk a lot about, on your website at least, don't look back. That seems to be the brewery's mantra at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How is that translated into other beers? Because it sounds like, with at Atlanta, you found an evolution process. It's worked, and you've just sort of moved on. But there's so many. I think there is a reverence still, even among small breweries, of tradition, of finding something that works well once and sticking with it and not changing it for whatever reason. Don't Look Back to me, at least in my mind, is I don't know, a never ending evolution, or thinking about it that way.
It is, and I've struggled with that myself after, because I think philosophically it made more sense early on. That I really was trying to get away from what was around. I was kind of, especially with what was local at the time. And I really wanted to be pushing boundaries, and it's still, I think it's important to think about it in the sense that nothing, just because something was done this way doesn't mean it has to be done that way. You can always be reassessing why you do something the way you do it. But we, Orpheus, me, we have taken a much more in the last few years, especially the last year or two. I feel like I've gotten much closer to the historical roots of beer making than I originally was. Like, I think I actually started from kind of a backlash point of view when I started home brewing and developing the concept for the brewery.
What does that mean?
Without, um, it was a lot of what I wanted to do was kind of, for one, I actually didn't have a huge amount of appreciation for a lot of historical styles. Um, I actually, my beer journey started. Um, I didn't drink beer for a long time. I
Mm-hmm.
actually didn't drink at all when I was younger. Um, but like my first experiences with beer were like, pale lagers, and I thought they were pretty disgusting, and didn't really start drinking beer until a bit later when discovered some darker beers, a little bit of Dunkel, and then moved on to stout. And didn't really come back to lagers until a few years ago. We didn't brew one until less than 2 years ago. Um, and so I really, yeah. So early on, I was really like rejecting a whole lot of beer history, and just trying to move forward. And it was all about what's exciting. And I think I had less of an appreciation back then for like what's just like good to sit down and drink.
Mm-hmm.
Even though like I never really cared for the idea of pushing boundaries if it didn't just taste good. And so for me, no matter what you're doing, whether it's some wild stuff or whatever adjuncts you're using, like the first thing I'm going to use to judge my beer or anyone else is this pleasurable to drink? But there is especially on the more simple side, subtle crafted side, and didn't really appreciate that stuff as much as I do now.
And then when you got into it, though, it seems like you went full tilt on it. That, especially in going back to some of the cool ship beers that I've had from your brewery, um, you really are trying to stay as faithful to history and process as possible.
Yeah, I mean, so I never the only beers I was originally planning on brewing, like people, I mean, we call it like Atalanta was beer we launched with. It's we call it the tart plum face on. It's not like a very traditional face on.
Well,
Um,
I
the
would,
only
yeah.
the only people would consider us kind of a Belgian style brewery at first. We didn't launch with an IPA. I think it's one of the main reasons. But the only beers I ever intended to actually do kind of faithful to a historical style would be lambic type beers. So we still haven't really done any other Belgian beers that are very strictly to style. So yeah, but that was always, I figured even with Don't Look Back, I was like, well, it's not like there's many American breweries. I mean, at this point, when we were planning the brewery, Jester King hadn't released any yet. Russian River had released spontaneous bullshit beer. Allagash had. I think that was in the U.S.
Well, New Glarus and a few others, but yeah. But you're right that there weren't many. Yeah.
At that point, so I figured, okay, they've been doing it like this for a long time in Belgium, but not here. So it's still like in the scene that we're in. It's something new.
Tell me about your cool ship.
So it's two of them. I actually have no idea what they were originally built for. They're just open top cylindrical vessels. Gotten into people have tried to argue with me that they're not cool ships because if I didn't get them babbed as cool ships and pretty, but we've used them as open fermenters and fill them up more. If we use them as cool ships, we just don't fill them very high, and they're ugly. I basically bought them for scrap price. Right around when we opened, and but I think you're a cool ship. I mean, it has to work like a cool ship, and that's what really matters.
Yeah.
So.
And what about
pretty? We can't, they're just sitting in the middle of the brewery. When we use them as cool ships, we leave dock doors open a little bit and blow fans across. So. Yeah, I used to think one day we'll get pretty ones, but I don't know. At this point, it works.
And what about your microflora? What as you've had now, multiple years of spontaneous inoculation, what have the flavor profiles been? What have you started to see as, I don't know, native flavors, native aromas?
It's changed a little bit over the years. We definitely kind of a character that they start off when they're young on the kind of perfumey, phenolic side, and it's and some of them at this point have moved away from that faster, so they eventually get kind of most of them aren't super funky. So they get fruity, lemony. Sometimes a little bit of, sometimes you get some stone fruit, a little bit of diesel.
A little bit of diesel.
Really, they've gotten more consistent, and we've had to dump less and less over the years. So, yeah, I mean, acid level generally isn't super high, which I like. I mean, sometimes I actually have to work to find more acidic barrel to blend, but I generally am not looking for super acidic beer.
That seems to be what I'm starting to see, that shift as well, that for a while, either spontaneous or things that were being quote unquote Belgian inspired that were coming out of US breweries were acidic almost to the point of undrinkability. And the folks who could make it through a glass or two of stuff, they were taking it as this badge of honor, that it was sort of this, extreme beer, or I don't even quite know what the appeal was. it was almost like, some of the brewers in the early days of craft who were just, part of the IBU wars and just hopping the shit out of stuff just for the sake of it. It seemed like, the more acetic a beer was, you know, the better it was in people's minds. But I think we're starting to come back from that now as well. And
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so. I mean, it's like the IBU wars. People came to their senses. I
Hmm.
think part of it was probably people didn't know how to control the acid on the brewer's side. Um, so we've had to, and we've made the main changes that we've made batch to batch and year to year on our um, spontaneous production is just hopping levels, trying to find the exact right amount, or making sure that we're changing it up within a season a little bit, knowing that based on hopping levels, we're going to get some batches that are going to end up more acidic, some less, so we can blend. Um, and so for me, like in the beginning, people would always talk about sour beer being beer that you had to kind of work your way up to, or you had to like know something about it to enjoy it, like you needed some expertise. And it was never like that for me. It was, I mean, from the first um, sip of Duchess that I had,
Hmm.
March 18th, 2009, I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that is amazing. There was no, didn't have to acclimate to it. Um, and so mine, but think about little kids love sour stuff, you know, I mean, people like acidic foods.
The
They
shock of
like
it. Yeah.
acidic drink. There's no reason for acidic beer to be different than anything else. Like if it's done well, if it's done with the intention of balance and you know um, beauty, pleasure, then there's you shouldn't have to acclimate to it. I mean, it
Hmm.
still doesn't mean it's going to be for everybody, but the idea that it wasn't something for everybody, or that you needed to be like some beer expert on it to enjoy it. I just never bought into that.
As you, I'm just trying to think of like how you have had these conversations with people, because you're right. Like as kids, we are, we like the sourness, we like the abrasiveness of it, and even in other foods as well. But I still find that it is a difficult conversation to have with folks who are not used to it, or these sensations or these
Have
flavors
certain
in beer.
expectations for what beer is,
Yeah.
and that's where the difficulty is.
Yeah.
So I would, especially early on, I would present before even not necessarily telling them it was beer. Be like, try this. Think about it. It's kind of like I made this. You think about it sort of like wine like or cocktail like. They drink it, they'd like it, and be like, that's beer that you just had.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, getting people away from what their expectations of beer are, I think, is the hardest thing. People expect beer to be one thing, and it can be many other things. So that's the kind of tricking people around it isn't as necessary anymore. I don't think.
Yeah. Thinking about beer in one way, and now talking about evolution as well. I want to sort of change gears a little bit and give you a chance to talk about this um, leadership program that the brewery has launched, because people have
Oh yeah,
thought about beer being one particular way, and that's middle-aged white dudes, as it were. But there is a shift happening in the industry for the better, for more diversity and inclusion. And I've been surprised with conversations from brewers who, either hadn't been giving it much thought before this year, or, a little bit of thought, only, or, not having applicants or a chance to actually make their own businesses be more inclusive and have more uh, people who have different backgrounds and different thoughts and different experiences. Um, so tell me a little bit about this program that you guys are doing.
All right, so it's called the Leadership Diversity Program, and it came about. Well, looking back a long time, I was always disappointed in lack of diversity in applicants. Um, on the brewing side, especially, we actually early on had a very diverse taproom staff, but it was looking back, like I think there was something about Orpheus that led us to have a more diverse taproom staff early on, and then I realized a few years in that it wasn't as diverse as it had been, and started off with a sign-up sheet to work our when we were before the laws changed. It was we were only open a few hours a week, probably a short shift, so we just had people sign up to work and made good tips, and there wasn't so much of a hiring process beyond if you sign up, you'll at least get a shift, and if you keep coming back, you'll probably be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
As it got more, as the hours expanded, as it became more heavily managed, um, I think, and I wasn't running the taproom side of things at the time, but I think it was looking back, trying to figure out what happened. I think as people got hired instead of volunteer sign up, it was way too much just hire friends of friends,
Right.
and it got away from the much more open call that we originally had. And so realizing that, along with the fact that we actually, when we had open calls for like the more like production side of things, we didn't have diverse candidates. So between those two, realized that both need to be more active in making sure that job postings go out, make sure that um, diverse candidates actually see it,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that for more upper level jobs that you know there are diverse candidates available. And it's something that early on I just figured, well, we're a small brewery. We it's a problem, but like, it's not, you know, it's somebody else's problem, I guess was the thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, like it's a big industry. What are we supposed to do about this?
Right.
And, you know, six years later, it's the same problem. Nobody else has done anything about it. I was like, well, I guess if we don't do anything about it, who is? You know, this at some point you just have to realize there's a problem, and nobody's fixed it in 6 years or tried that it might not happen if you don't try to be part of the solution.
And one of the things that I liked about
So,
this program and sort of uh, the qualifications for people to apply is that there's not a lot of restrictions on here. You know, you got to be 21 plus, but a lot of it is really just, you know, desire or interest. It seems so. There's not
right,
a ton of roadblocks that go up.
right. Because I mean, if the problem is that there aren't people already here, then you know, if you start to say you have to have certain types of experience, then you're not opening that up to anybody new.
How's it been received?
Good. I mean, we're a few months into our first. So this is basically one fellow at a time for 6 months, and so they work with me a few hours a week on assorted topics, and then also rotate through um, basically all areas of the brewery.
Mm-hmm.
So our first fellow, Jade Briggs, she's been towards the end of her cellar and lab rotation, um, and about to start on the sales side soon. And I think it's going well. I think it's like my intent with this is basically at the end of the 6 months. I mean, if we were bigger, I mean, I would love be able to make sure that there's a job internally for everybody who finishes, but we're just not big enough to guarantee that. So we, at the end of this 6 months, or for the last like couple months, a big part of what we'll be working on and on the time together is making sure that there is a job lined up.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do is prepare for any type of leadership position. Kind of when I was trying to figure out who to hire, it had a lot of different things in mind about how to narrow it down, and finally realized it was actually kind of pandemic related. My board had wanted me to come up with a succession plan, whether it was long term or a short term thing, and
Yeah.
didn't really have that set up very well. And talking to people in the brewery, nobody really wants my job actually, which kind of surprising in some ways. But I was like, okay, so I'm gonna approach this choosing who the fellow will be based on, can I get this person ready to take my job in 6 months?
It's an interesting
Or
approach.
at least parts of it.
Yeah.
So that's my intention, is just get somebody who could run a brewery.
Yeah. Well, it's been nice to see these programs pop up at breweries across the country, and I'm glad that you all are doing it, and I'm gonna sort of keep an eye on it. But I hope it continues to go well. Before I let you go, two more quick things I just wanted to get into with you is.
Yeah.
One of your other brewery taglines is you talked about native funk, old barrels, big hops, and a little bit of chaos. 2020 doesn't need any more chaos in it.
I don't know. Chaos is fun.
All right. Why? Tell me why.
Well, I guess it started as a little bit of a joke. My production man, director of brewing operations, sometimes calls me a chaos monster. So thinks that, I mean, so
I don't know
we'll
if that's a
have
compliment.
a basic plan.
Yeah.
We'll have a basic plan, and then sometimes I like to change stuff up. Or like take something that, a beer that is going to be going out. I'm like, this isn't quite where it needs to be, and sometimes it takes a lot to get it to where I want it to be. Maybe some kind of convoluted processes, or just it's like, oh, there's not really room in the schedule, but I think we need to process 600 pounds of peaches this afternoon.
Boy, I can't imagine why you can't find anybody who wants to take over your job.
So, yeah, I mean, so I like the unexpected, and I like it's more than anything unexpected. It's really about, this is a factory. We have to treat it like it's a factory. There's beer, go sit on shelves in grocery stores, hundreds of miles away, so there is that factory aspect of it. But this will always be something where, when it comes down to it, we can make what we want, how we want to make it, when we want to make it, and always have to have that feeling to it.
Yeah. You had a career in music before you got into brewing. What did being a trumpet player teach you about beer?
Oh man, so early on, I was dealing with my trumpet teacher in high school. Was actually head of the jazz program at Georgia State, where I ended up going, and he was driving me into town to check out the campus, and we stopped at a bar, and he met another professor, and they got some beer, and he said, "Jason, one thing you have to know is that as a trumpet player, you have to finish your beer." So Yes, that was the first lesson. After that, I really think it's like I was classically trained. I have both my degrees, undergrad and masters, are orchestral performance, and just the way of approaching practicing, the way of breaking everything down into its most fundamental levels. And being able to approach every problem. And so in music, that problem could be just you know, a small passage, or a long passage with small parts in it, or however you break it down.
Mm-hmm.
But you can always if you're having trouble with something, there's always a more fundamental level you can break it down to, until you get to literally just one note.
Yeah.
And lots of fundamentals can be worked on a single note, getting from note to note. So that approach is how I had to think about building and operating the brewery. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a home brewer brewing 5 gallons at a time, and designed the brewery and processes without actually knowing commercial processes, but just had to think through, okay, we have to go from point A to point whatever Z, which is beer on the shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
Or somebody having it at their house 3 months later and drinking it. And what are all the steps that have to come in between? So that's, to me, always been the really big carryover. And for me, I was also a composer, improviser. So I do like thinking on my feet like that and coming up with new things. And I always wanted to be making something.
I've known a lot of brewers who have musical backgrounds, and there is usually a correlation between the two, because certain beers have a harmony to it. They just work, all of the ingredients just work together in such a way that, it is like experiencing a piece of music.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do think about flavors in a lot of ways, think about harmonic structures with in ways that I don't sometimes know how to describe some flavors in other ways, but I taste some things and there's bass notes, there's mid tones, there's high tones. You don't have those high tones in there. Somehow you gotta be a little muddy. You don't have the low tone, be a little overwhelming. So yeah, I definitely think about it, building balance harmonically.
Well, I'm going to remind everybody that you don't need to be a trumpet player to finish your beer, and that you should always finish your beer. Jason, thanks for taking the time.
And encouraging responsibility. Even a trumpet player doesn't have to finish their beer.
Also true. You also don't have to finish your beer if you don't want to. But it's election season, and these days I think finishing a beer is probably a smarter idea. Jason, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
That's Jason Pellett of Orpheus Brewing in Atlanta. He tells me that the next round of applications for the Leadership Diversity Program will be open in a few weeks, and you can find more at orpheusbrewing.com. My thanks to him for being on the show, and my thanks to you for listening. You can always reach me at John Hall, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or on Twitter at John_Hall. And also, please make sure to check out beeredge.com to listen to Andy Crouch's podcast, The Beer Edge Podcast, and to sign up for the newsletter and more. Go to beeredge.com. Tune in to Steal This Beer every Monday and the BYO Nano podcast on the 15th of every month. Nate Schweber does the music. He's got a new album out. It's called Gaps, and you can check that out at nateschweber.bandcamp.com. Jeff Quinn designed the logo for the show, and I'm John Hall. New episodes are released every Wednesday, regardless of the election outcome, and I'll be back with you again next week to drink beer and to think beer. Thanks for listening.